And pretty sure we're going to be live in about 2 seconds here. I don't have my headphones with me. I think they're upstairs. So I'm going to assume the volume's working just from looking at little settings or the little monitoring OBS thing. Looks like volume's fine, so we're good to go. Today, definitely tired, as I always am in the morning. I kind of think of myself as a morning person for the most part, but since I started this stream, it's been I've been tired every morning. I think that, but I feel really good otherwise. Everything else is going pretty good in my life. I'm really happy about everything. So I think that like this week will be just getting my sleep schedule back. I had it really good for a couple weeks there, and then everything kind of fell apart, and now it's all fucked up. So I think that's been an issue. So it'll be like this week we'll be working on like building my sleep routine back up, and I think that'll be really helpful. But regardless, the show goes on. Got my little tea here with my little kitty cat on the side, so feeling pretty good about that. Today I'm going to be talking about something that I set for the stream goal this week, which was for the stream goal this week is to put together a front end developer roadmap for how to learn, how to go from like zero to hero kind of a thing for front end stuff, and like what you should follow if you're trying to be a front end developer. If you want a job as a front end developer and you don't know anything, this is like the path. The stream goal this week has been to put this together. I want to put this on the website in some form or fashion, but I think that it's like right now I just have it in like little blurby text, and it's not too hashed out. So a lot of this is going to be like most of my streams, which has been like almost like I don't know the full solution for this thing, but I have an idea, and we're just going to talk about it, and then I'll get some ideas, and then I'll put together like a more some kind of like a flow mappy kind of a thing. So let's say you've decided that you want to change your career, you want to do software engineering stuff. You don't know beyond that. You don't know anything. Let's just say you're like, fuck my current job. I just want something new, and this seems like a thing. The first thing I would suggest, because there's many paths you could go down. There's a lot of different. The world of like software engineering is it's an ocean. So you need to pick specialization or like figure out how you're going to learn this stuff, how you're going to get a job in this like big ocean of shit. I'll tell you what I recommend, which again, like everything I said is based on this isn't based on like a book or based on something I read online. This is my personal experience. I think so. Take everything I say with that grain of salt, and I'm just going to be talking about like my opinion on this. It's not going to be the right opinion, and I might say a lot of wrong shit, but I think I know what I'm talking about a little bit here. So you decide you want to be a developer, you want to do software engineering, you want to do software development, you want to learn how to code and get a job, but you don't know anything. I would very strongly, the field of like software engineering, specifically for web-related stuff, which is what you're going to do, which is what I do. I mean, that's pretty much what the world of software is now, is everything's online. You're going to be like shoehorned into either this like front end or back end categorization. There's a very, very strong division there within just like the world of software. It's very, very, and these are very, and so software, so like from a top down perspective, like from software, we're going to web stuff. And then from web stuff, we're looking at front end and back end. So we're already like in this like weird hierarchy of stuff, and we're already like pretty far down the tree. If you want to do like mobile development, this is like the path is different. Or if you want to do, if you want to be a database person, that's a different thing. And there's, like I said, like this is a big world. So I'm already like cutting down to a small part here. But this is what I would recommend. The reason so you're in the world of web development and you're looking at either back end or front end. And I always recommend, no one listens to me, by the way, like I've recommended this to many people, but they seem to not like really follow it. I always recommend if you're trying to get into the industry, front end is probably the fastest way to do it for a few reasons. The first is that they don't teach JavaScript in school, so you're on a more like computer science people are not going to learn a fucking inch of front end web development. If they do, it's like it's like outdated and it's not relevant. So because of that, Whereas with backend, it's very common that they'll learn like Java or even like a C sharp or like, but even like learning C++ or like C, you'll have a leg up for the other backend languages. So I think that if you're coming from a self-taught approach, you're just keep in mind that you might be competing with like people who have been doing like computer science people who have been doing this for a while. Regardless of that, the people with computer science degrees often tell me that what they learned in school has absolutely zero has been zero help for what they do now, or not even zero help, but more like just it's not applicable. So and it's definite, like tons of people have gone self-help or the self-taught route as a back-end engineer and gotten a job. So many people have done that, and it's very doable. I just happen to think that front end is an easier domain to break into, but again, that's very much so my opinion. So let's say you want to be a software engineer, you're coming to me, I'm going to recommend you be a front end dev, which is basically the front end is just writing code that runs in a browser. That's like the whole, everything that, if it runs in a browser, if it exists inside of Chrome or Firefox or whatever, that's like your domain. There is good job security with it. Like as long as web browsers are around, front end developers will be around, and as long as UI is around, as long as like there's any kind of interface, which there always will be, then front end people will probably exist. It's also, there's just a ton of jobs for it right now. There's tons of jobs for back end stuff too. I think the ceiling is, I've talked about this before, I think the ceiling is lower for earnings for front end, but the point is, the reason you want to get into front end is because you want to get a job as fast as you can, just so you can see the world of software development. And then once you're there, I think it's then then it's cool to think about like going to back end if you want to do that. But I generally think to break in, front end is the best way to do it. So you want to learn front end, where do you start? The best place to learn, I mention this all the time, is a website called freecodecamp.org, and we're going to look at it here in a second. Let's look at their like curriculum and shit. Let me make my head small for a second here, and then we'll blow this guy up here for a minute. Let's just do it like this. Okay. Just for a second here, and then we'll be like, we'll be back to just my head. So this is free code. This is like the site, freecodecamp.org. You sign in with whatever, and they'll give you like this little dashboard thingy here. And then from here, they have all of these different, this is all completely free. They have all of these free courses and they've really expanded this shit out. They have all these different curriculums. It's all free. It's all like really up to date shit. And I would suggest that you literally go through these first three here, and just do them. Like that's your first thing. Just this. As you go through, you will need other resources to complete some of these things. For example, like there's like projects in here and shit. Yeah. So like these projects here, you will definitely use like outside resources and shit to help you for sure. But you like the goal here is just to get through this shit. I think that this one, even this one, you can maybe skip. I would say these first two are probably what you want, but really I think all three together, 300 hours is not how long these are going to take. They'll take 1 to 2 weeks each, probably something like that, depending on how often you're doing it, how much you're doing it. This is where you want to start. Don't flail and start. Don't do like Udemy computer science courses. Don't do like Harvard computer CS50 courses. Don't do any of that shit. Just like that's not going to help you with anything. Come do this. Do this stuff. And this will give you like the basic principles, the basic stuff for front end development, which is at its core 3 things: HTML, CSS, JavaScript. If you know those 3 things, you could probably get a job. Probably. I guess it depends on what you mean by know, though, or what I mean by know, like how much you should know. When you're doing this stuff, understand you're not going to remember everything. In fact, you're going to forget things very, very fucking quickly. You should not be memorizing things. just go through the course. Don't get too like into it. Honestly, also don't like obviously take it seriously and like have an idea of what's going on. But like my first time going through this shit, I didn't know a ton of stuff. It didn't really matter. You're just trying to like, again, this is something I say a lot. Your first month, you're just trying to see if you like it. But your first month, you can get a pretty good chunk of learning in. But be patient with yourself, because this kind of like requires a big shift in how you think. Like coding's going to change how you think. It's going to take a minute for you to see it, and it's going to be very, very difficult at first. I remember it took me like weeks to finish some of this stuff. Even like these projects, which I can now do in about 10 minutes, almost all of them. I would think 10 to 20 minutes. It's going to take, a week possibly for you. So just be very patient for yourself. And if it takes longer than a month or whatever, it takes longer than a month. But this is like it might even take 3 months, honestly. But these first three guys here, this is good shit. So you learn about HTML, the basics of HTML. Again, there's going to be more. Of course, there's more to all this. You're not going to be an expert in any of these things by the time they're done. But HTML, which is of the three things, this is probably the simplest one. You'll learn like basic enough that you can put together a web page basically, but you won't really know. There's like little nuances you won't know. But HTML, you could pretty much get a good chunk of, like the gist of, pretty quickly. CSS is a fickle beast. It's a huge domain. It's bigger than you think. CSS can be very tricky. It's very difficult, and it's a whole world. And I would suggest learning the basics, which is going to be like CSS selectors, and then the very basic CSS properties. But you're gonna have to, like, if you find yourself looking up how do I make font color blue or whatever, if you find yourself looking that up more than once or a lot, that's great. That's fine. Like, do not worry about that. Do not worry about like not memorizing, CSS properties. That's gonna get you fucking nowhere. So don't worry about that. Just like for CSS, honestly, when you first start, just hack through it and make shit work. Don't worry too much about it, honestly. Hack through it, make shit work. It's one of those things that it just takes time. If you want, and it's also tough because CSS doesn't really have, there's like basic principles and fundamentals of CSS, of course, things like CSS specificity, positioning, display. There's a couple like really key things to know. Having said that, I have found very few, like CSS is one of the hardest things to learn because there's not really, there's like the basics are very like, they don't really build on top of each other. There's just some basic principles you need to know. And then otherwise it's a whole lot of hacking and like a whole lot of trial and error and a whole lot of like, you just need to fuck up. You need to like, CSS is really tough. You can't, it's not JavaScript where if something goes wrong, you could just like pop in debugger or console log some stuff and find out what's going on. It can be very tricky. And I would say when you're first starting out, don't get too like, it's very, very, you want your shit to look good. Like, especially when you first start out, you think it's really cool. Like, of course, it's cool to have shit that looks good, even like animation, stuff like that. That's all great. I would just say that like, don't get tied up and don't spend too much time on just CSS, because for me personally, I'll be honest, I've probably written, like the amount of time I've written CSS relative to, like I've written like, at my job, I'll write like 90% JavaScript, 5% HTML, 5% CSS, something like that. Like for most jobs, most companies, most places you work, they're going to have like design systems. They're going to have ways of doing things. So you're probably not going to be writing too much raw dog CSS, depending on where you work. But you don't really need to know, like CSS, fine. It'll come in time. I've never been asked a CSS question in an interview, so I wouldn't worry too much about it, but just know enough that you could hack through it and make shit look more or less like what it's supposed to look like. Down the road, like as you get better, like you need to be able to execute pixel perfect CSS in your sleep, basically, but you'll get there. Like that's something you'll get to, and you don't need that for your first job, probably, depending on what you do. But and you might find that you really like CSS and you get into it, and then that's no problem. But anyway, the big dog is JavaScript. So after you get like this responsive web design stuff, I'm assuming that this is just HTML and CSS. Probably is. You definitely do want to learn a bit about responsive web design, because that, like, you want to learn about what that means and like how to execute it and how it's kind of done like the same in all kinds of things. But the basic idea is like you need to have some CSS or something, use a library or something that can help you make your website sort of transform as the screen gets smaller, so that you have a website that looks good on desktop and then also looks good on tablet and mobile and all that shit. So that's the basic idea. And that's responsive web design is like a web standard to some extent these days. It's very rare for you to build a website. It'll happen, but it's pretty rare for you to build something for a company or that a client's asking for that doesn't need to work across multiple screen sizes. Pretty rare. So it's almost like you have to know that. But that's like 2 days of learning, 1 or 2 days, and then you get like, you know, to get the basics, and then you'll learn more as time goes on. Like media queries, maybe a little bit, shit like that. But you don't really need to know that kind of stuff, just the basics, just like the broad strokes. So let's say you finish this guy, and then you're on to the next one, which is your JavaScript. And this is the whole thing right here. This is huge. This is like the most important thing you'll need to know as a front-end developer is JavaScript language. JavaScript is a language, it's programming language, coding language, or scripting language, depending on whatever idiot you talk to. And it's just like the code that your browser uses. So all the stuff that's happening on this page, like the thing that's making this little, actually this could be CSS, raw CSS, but like there's not too much shit here, but if I look at maybe the menu popping out, basically JavaScript is like what's handling this. It's like programming language, and then you're interacting with like the browser API. So you're using JavaScript to interact, to tell the browser what to do when certain things happen, things like that. And for JavaScript is, you know, full programming language. So it's, you know, there's a lot. It's a huge, this is like this is an ocean in an ocean. JavaScript itself is a fucking ocean. And, you know, it's one of those things that like you'll never master or like whatever, you know, it's easy to learn, but difficult to it's not even easy to learn, honestly. It's, it's tough. It'll take you a minute to adjust everything, but it's just a huge world. Like it's huge. You know, you could spend every day of your life for 10 years doing this stuff, and there'll be JavaScript language features that you'll never heard of. It's definitely in that like 80-20, 90-10 sort of thing where only 10% or 20% of the language features are actually going to get used and seen commonly. But you do want to, like, you know, you want to know all the basic stuff. You definitely want to know what they call ES6, which is sort of the modern spec for JavaScript. It's like the modern language syntax for it, and there are some caveats to that. But you want to learn all like the basic stuff, the data types, functions, variable declarations, how code is executed, you know, from top to bottom. Just go through all of it, and there is like, if you've never written a line of code before, you're going to be tossed in the deep end. But it's doable. It's very doable. The first week or 2 weeks is tough, but you figure it out pretty quickly if you just stick with it. And then that's just for the basic stuff. Eventually, what you're going to need to get into, and like if we look at this, oh, interesting. So they have different ones for these different libraries. That is really fucking cool. Interesting. So these are all, I'm looking because none of these require a backend web service. So this is all very, very pure front end. I wonder if they have crazy. I guess maybe somewhere in here they'll have projects or something. Interesting. They used to have like build a weather app, and there's another one too. But anyway, so regardless of it, the thing with these is that these are all pure front end stuff, so you don't need a back end web service to make any of these things. If you have some, I recommend, like, as your first app, building a weather app. The reason is because to build a weather app, you have to communicate with a back end service. It's literally one it's like the simplest app you can make that does a network request, because it just fires off a GET request right when you load the page, and that's pretty much it. You have to, like, for front end and JavaScript, you have to know how to make a network request. Have to understand that stuff and understand it pretty well. That is like a huge part of what you're going to be doing, is going to be sending requests and handling responses. That's like the core of front end. That's huge. I think it's like, I don't think it's everything, but it's like a huge part of it. And it's not that complicated, but doing it, you'll have to, like, you know, you'll fuck with like the fetch API or XHR or some library. They all work more or less the same. It's like, you know, call a method or call a thing with a URL, and then that's just going to give you back, well, you'll get a promise, and you'll have to handle the promise, and then eventually you'll get a response, you'll get your data back, and then you just have to, like, parse the data in a certain way and handle it. It is like the meat of front end stuff for sure. That, and then like UI interactions are probably like the meat of everything. So I would really recommend, first thing, honestly, like within your first 3 weeks or something, build a weather app. All that a weather app has to be is like, go out to your website, and when you load the page, just have the temperature, like something simple like that. And we can even code that on stream. Maybe I'll do that at some point. Basic weather app. But doing something like that, that's and it'll be really hard because you won't know what the fuck's going on. I remember I think my weather app I did okay on. There were a couple of the projects that I really was like, I don't know how the fuck to do this, and I had to go on YouTube and watch a tutorial of someone doing the exact same thing that I was doing. And I remember seeing them, like, if they ever got an error, like if I got an error when I was doing something, I'd panic and I didn't know what the fuck was going on. Errors are good. Read the errors, because they usually are telling you like exactly what you're fucking up. But yeah, definitely do that. I also think during this time of this first couple months, you want to be chat's not up, but I don't know if anyone's talking, but probably not. But let's do this. Just getting back up here. I just want to check chat real quick. I don't think anybody's here, but you know, just in case. And I'm also realizing now that if the volume is, I hope there's not any background volume anywhere. Desktop audio. No, it looks good. That's fine. Okay. I kind of forgot what I was talking about. I was talking about like XHR, making network requests and shit like that. But yeah, that's the core of stuff that you need to know for sure. And then chat, no one here. Cool. But yeah, maybe I'll build a weather app on a stream one day just to show what that would look like. So let's say you've done that. You've built these projects, and it'll take you months to do this, to do just what I'm saying here. Like, it'll take you months. It's a whole lot. But you're just learning, like, and as you learn, you'll see people suggesting things like frameworks and libraries and all that stuff. When you're first starting out, I wouldn't worry too much about that until you're about 1 or 2 months in. It took me like 2 or 3 months before I tried to learn React a bunch when I first started out, and it was hard. I remember it was really hard at first. It's fucking weird because it's one of those things that once you see it, everything's very simple and easy. But if you don't see it, everything's very confusing. You'll definitely be watching tutorials and not knowing what's going on and just like typing whatever the instructor is doing and be like, I fucking hope that that's right. And feeling like you're not learning anything, but just trust the process and keep going through and all that stuff. You'll get there. All this stuff takes so much time. You'll have to learn the same thing over and over and over and over again. It just takes a lot of time. Even now, I very, like, almost everything I do. There's a resource called MDN, which is Mozilla Developer Network or some shit like that, and it's basically the documentation for how JavaScript in your web browser works and just how all the browser API works. And it's like the most It's some of the best documentation in existence, I think. But it's basically like the handbook for front end development to some extent in JavaScript. And I'm on MDN not every second of every day of my job, but it's all the time. Like, I look up stuff all the time. Even when I'm like, I mean, you could see it in my live coding. Sometimes I just straight Google something, like not even using the docs. I'm just like, how do you fucking make this thing fucking so? You know, stuff like that all the time. But let's say you did that. You've done your projects. You built like a couple simple, like their little like tic-tac-toe projects and all that stuff. And you did your weather app and you went through it. You probably still feel like you don't know anything at that point. Maybe you know a little bit. I would also recommend, while you're doing the JavaScript stuff, one of the things that helped me a lot when I was starting out, actually, wait, before I get into that. So while we're still talking about like these basic and the free code camp stuff, the one other thing that I think is super, the earlier you learn it, the better, and it's like invaluable. It's like a gold mine of shit is the Chrome Dev Tools. The browser dev tools can do some amazing things. I remember like my first year learning stuff and learning about the dev tools as time went on. It almost felt like there were parts of the dev tools that I wasn't even like ready to know about yet. And then when I was ready to know about them, then they like emerged. A good example of that is like the network tab. So if you look at and I'll go back to, let's look at this in an actual thing real quick. Transform. Here we go. This guy. Just doing something really quick here. Okay. So there's me. Let's do this here, this here, this here. Okay, real quick, like, what am I talking about with the DevTools stuff? And I'll just leave it like this, a little sloppy here. We'll just maximize this guy. So inside the DevTools, what I'm talking about here is like, from the moment you start writing code, you're familiar with like these first two tabs, basically. The first, this is basically like, an element selector within your page, and it lets you like look at CSS and shit. So when you're learning HTML and CSS, you'll learn about this shit pretty quickly. You might not know. You should learn how to fuck with it too. It'll be really fucking helpful. Like I do all my CSS work in the browser now, and then move it over to code usually. But regardless, you'll see this stuff, and you'll know about like console, and you can like enter JavaScript in here. Hey. So this is kind of fun. This returns high because you're logging high, but the expression here also gets evaluated. Anything you put in here, expression gets evaluated and then printed. So console log returns high. The 5 returns 5. Anyway, within here, there's all these other tabs too, and these are third-party ones, but like up to Lighthouse, these are all tabs. And like when you first start out, you'll never be in the network tab, but at some point in your career, this will be like the holy grail. Like depending on what you do again, but the network tab is basically telling you what requests are being made from the client and like info on those requests. So you can see, like, if I go to Google or something, you'll see all the network requests here. Oh shit, I don't want to go to email. I don't want to show you my email. If I go to Google though, these are all like the requests that are being made from your client, from your browser outbound. So you can see here we're requesting, this is like the request for the HTML document. And you can see like that, this is what gets returned. And then, everything gets requested. And this is like your, this is really where you're living in XHR world, which is, the fuck is it? I can't remember what it stands for. Cross. Oh, it's AJAX, like asynchronous JavaScript asynchronous XML, some shit like that. Anyway, it's just making requests like during the runtime after the page loads. But this is like where you're living basically. So you'll be like making, if you're a weather app, you'll see like when you make a request, you'll see like the URL here and the response and like the headers and all this shit. And this is very, very useful. But the point is that the dev tools are like something that as you learn more, you'll become more and more, you'll learn more about, and you'll like find more use out of, and like they're everything. So when you're first starting out, the faster you can like get accustomed to dev tools, the better, and then just go from there. But yeah, dev tools, know that shit. I didn't know too much about dev tools before I started my job, so you don't need to know too much. They're not going to. This is the kind of stuff they're not going to ask you in an interview. So to be fair, I think it's very fucking helpful to know, but you don't really need it to get your first job. First job, arguably, this stuff right here is all you really need to get your first job, because you just need to pass an interview. You need to convince someone to let you interview and then to pass the interview, and like you might actually, this is probably really good too. But you don't need to know like Git to get your first job. You'll look like an idiot if you don't know Git, but you don't need it to get a job. You should still know it. But yeah, regardless of that, let's say you do all this stuff, you get your dev tools, you know your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you're gonna have to pick a front end framework to learn. So almost anywhere you work in the world of front end, you're going to be using like one of these Vue libraries, of which there are a few that are super popular. And when you like go to learn front end engineering, front end software development, this is like the first thing people talk about. It shouldn't be the first thing, but it's up there. And there's basically 3 or 4 or 5 of these that are really popular. The ones that everyone knows, React, Vue, and Angular are the ones that everyone knows. And then there's a couple like lagging behind that are like newish, like Svelte is kind of a newer one that people are really interested in. And these are coming out every day. But the core 3 are Angular, Vue, and React. And within that, I highly, I could not recommend this more. Learn React, because there's the most jobs are in React. The most future-proof shit is in React. React's been around for a long time. Like, people keep talking about these front-end frameworks like they cycle in and out. All 3 of them have been around for more than 5 years, so I think that's kind of not true. And React is being actively developed. It's owned by Facebook, and Facebook, like, they do a really great job. They're constantly working on it, and because it's used by Facebook themselves for all of their shit, like Instagram uses React Native and shit, even, it's not going anywhere. Like, React is here to stay for a long time, and I think it's also like you'll get a whole lot of really good programming principles from learning it. Like, it's a very functional programming type style, so you'll get a lot of that out of it. You probably won't know what the fuck's going on at first. Hell, to be fair, the number of people who've dug into React source code who use React daily is fucking minimal. So you don't even have to worry too much about how the internals of it work. You just need to know how to use it. And it's made all 3 of them now have like really nice beginner programs, or they have like ways of starting apps that are really easy. React has like some CLI called Create React App, which is like very, very easy to bootstrap everything. Like, you literally run one line and it builds you like a sample app, and you can start developing from there. Highly recommend React. It's hard. It'll be really hard at first, but just stick with it and you'll eventually get it. But yeah, there's a lot of jobs out there for React. Like, you could go on LinkedIn right now and look up for like React developer, and there's an ass load of them. It's basically what's gotten me all 3 of my jobs, I would say. And it's going to be like, when you start working at, your company, wherever you might end up, they're going to be using like a front-end framework for sure. So, and yeah, if it's React, you go in there and you'll like know what's going on and shit, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, definitely need to know this. And then again, like all of these things, React, it is like, even though it is a library within a language, it is quite a large domain. There is a lot going on, and it will take you quite a while to learn. To learn any of this stuff, like to learn something like React, the way I learned, the way everybody's going to learn, you're just going to build shit with it. So you take your tutorial, you take your thing, you come out of your tutorial, and you're like, I have no fucking idea how to do any of this shit. You got to just sit down and say, fuck it. We just got to like, even if you like cheat a little bit, like even if you're like copying, pasting code and like cheating to get it done, you just got to start building projects with this stuff. The first one will be shitty, and then the second one will be less shitty, and then the third one will be even shittier, and then the fourth one might be like pretty good, and then, you know, you just want to keep building stuff. But yeah, I highly recommend React. I don't really recommend Angular. Is kind of out the door, and you're also, I don't know what it is about Angular, but it's very eggheady, and you'll be competing with, like, I don't know. I don't think you should learn Angular. I'll just leave it there. I don't think you should be learning Angular. There's too many people who know Angular too. If you look at like the market saturation for this, there's more people that know Angular than there are jobs, but not so with React. The other one, the sneaky dark horse, is Vue. And Vue is a great library. Vue is fantastic. If I was to get a new job now, I would be, you know, I'd probably, at this point, I would take a job if it was Angular, if everything else was cool. There was a long time when I was like, I would only take a job if it was React or Vue, but now I would take either one. But like a job doing Vue would be pretty fucking dope. And it's definitely, like, if you are poking through React and for whatever reason it's not for you, Vue is the most beginner friendly of these, and it is growing and like it's quite popular at this point. It's just it really is a great library. It's a great framework. I'm a big fan. I like React more, but Vue is pretty dope. So you just want to learn one of those three, and I would say learn React, and that'll be like another month. So right now you're probably about 2 or 3 months in. Like, I started coding in October, and I think I wrote my first React app the week of Christmas. And then, like, I didn't really start doing it again until, like, 2 weeks after that, I think. So, and I remember React, I came to it, and I couldn't, like, it was tough. It was definitely really, really tough at first. So be patient with yourself, and it'll take time. The other stuff I kind of added in here, like, at this point, you're ready. Like, at this point, if you have a couple projects done and you're, like, comfortable enough in JavaScript, you can make your fetch, you can make your network request. Like, if you got an interview question to make a network request and handle the response, you could do it. And then know, like, your basic algorithmic, like, it's the same fucking 5-10 things, really. For a first job, they're going to ask you, what's the difference between double and triple equality? Which I've gotten in every single fucking job. Every interview has asked me that. I think that that's just because the people who are interviewing you usually are like, people tend to be very busy, and thinking of interview questions probably doesn't get pushed to the top of the stack for priority. So they're probably just throwing that on there because, like, they Googled it or something. But for whatever reason, it does get asked all the time. So know that. Reverse a string, that's like a common one. Know how to sort things, because that'll probably be a thing. Know how to make your network request, because that's been asked for 2 of my interviews. Maybe even, no, just 2. Actually, my third job, the job I have now, there wasn't even really a technical portion. It was like all round table with engineers just talking about shit. Supposedly it gets like that as you go higher up the ladder. But, like, I didn't have to write code I didn't write a single line of code before they hired me, which is gnar. They could smell, you know? They could just tell. They know. To be fair, I also have a lot of stuff in open source, but I don't think they looked at that. So after you learn your framework, I do think, like, you could go on to, there's a website called Code Signal. There's a bunch of these where they'll give you very small JavaScript algorithmic-y kind of questions or problems to solve. Those are helpful to, like, for practicing interviewing, and, like, they're the kind of questions you'll get in an interview, so it's good to know them, or good to, like, have an idea of what that'll be like. Don't get too wrapped up in this. Like, these things kind of become their own world of, like, there's, like, leaderboards, and, like, some of the questions are fucking crazy hard, and at a certain point they just get kind of silly. But they were really good for me starting out to help me learn, like, array methods and string methods, regexes, shit like that. So you do a few of that. Again, don't go crazy, but like use it to like solidify your understanding of JavaScript. Basically, that's what you're looking for out of that. And then after that, at some point, probably this should be higher up. When you start writing projects, you should be using Git. This is like another one that has like kind of a weirdly big domain. Like Git's pretty complex, but like the basics aren't. It really isn't that complex. It just can seem like it. But you want to learn how to like, a top-down perspective of what Git is. You want to know how to like make branches, open pull requests, shit like that. Commit things. Maybe rebasing and shit like that. And I'll put I think when I put together I might put this together as a checklist on the website. That could be kind of cool. Like a checklist of things that you need to know for Git would be like this. But like you don't need to know too much, but you don't need to know the basics. Like on your first day, you're going to be probably checking out. You need to know how to like check out a repo and clone a repo and shit. Because that's gonna happen on your first day at your job. You're gonna have to do that. So if you don't know anything about Git, you're gonna look like a fucking idiot. You won't be asked. It's highly unlikely you'll be asked about like Git in a job interview. But you should still know it. And to be fair, you do kind of need to know it to put together your projects for your resume. So as you're building your projects, you should be using Git for sure. Like everything you do should be on GitHub. I should put that out there. All your projects, everything you do, even if it's just dumb nothing, like put everything on your GitHub. That's what I do. And I think it's just nice to have a ton of stuff out there, even if it's dumb. Like have a GitHub. That should be on the list too. That should be like number one. I'm going to put that as 0. Sign up for GitHub. But then like at this point, there's also like if you're doing projects, you're going to have to learn how to deploy things. You're going to have to learn how to like move things from your dev environment, your local host shit into the actual world. You don't need to know too much about it. You kind of just need to know this for your own purposes because it's unlikely that at work you're going to be deploying anything yourself or doing any kind of. They're not going to. You won't be trusted to do a release. Nor should you. That's like somebody's full-time job. Releases that's like a whole thing. And DevOps, that's a whole world. You don't have to know all that shit. You should know how to like for your own projects. Throw it up on Heroku. Just have it out there. This isn't too hard, and like it's something you could you'll just like Google it and follow some directions. But as you're making projects, you do want them to like exist. Even your blog, like you should build a portfolio probably at some point, and that's going to be on like a GitHub pages or some shit. So you're gonna have to know how to do that stuff. But again, not too much. It's not gonna. You don't need to know too much for your job. The next one is of all the stuff here. This is probably enough. That you know, if you're watching, you can't see it. But this is like the basics of backend development as you get better. Like when you start doing your own projects, if you're going to do a cool project, you're going to need a backend almost for sure. Luckily for you, JavaScript is not just a language that runs in the browser. It is, as of the last 7 years or however long Node has been around, there is a thing called Node, which is it's a runtime for JavaScript that you can execute outside of the browser. So basically this lets you use JavaScript as any other programming language to do things like make web servers. And today, for a long time now, Node has been a very, very popular choice among both the startup and all across all different scaled enterprises. It's like one of the most common backend languages now. It's just JavaScript that runs in the backend, or just JavaScript that runs in a runtime outside of the browser. So this lets you build web servers, which is really fucking cool. You'll look up something like Express, which is a library that'll help you do this, and you can you'll connect your Node server to a database maybe, and then you could call third-party services and do all this. Like, that's where shit can get really cool too. You can make much cooler shit than if you just knew front end. This will open up worlds basically. The problem is Node is it's a whole nother thing to learn, and it is a lot. Building web servers is no small feat. I remember when I started doing this, I was just copying and pasting code and had no fucking idea what the fuck I was doing, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that's fine. Just get the basic principles. The other important thing about Node is that in 2020, 2021, contemporary front-end development makes extensive use of build tools. So most of your projects are going to be going through, especially if you're at a company or it's a big project, the code you write, the project, when it gets deployed, is going to undergo like a number of sort of transformation processes. It's going to get the JavaScript you write is going to look very, very different than the JavaScript that ends up on the user's computer. And the reason for that is like there's like minification stuff. There's browser compatibility stuff that needs to happen. So your code might work, like your raw code may work in Chrome, but it may not work in like Internet Explorer. So there are tools called one of them's called Babel, which is a transpiler. It's going to take your code that doesn't work in certain environments, and it's going to like dumb it down. It's going to compile it, transform it into a version of JavaScript that will run in like IE and all this shit. This is going, almost every single thing you work on will use Babel or use like a Webpack-y thing or use like some kind of build tool to do its shit. And all that stuff runs in Node. Tests, unit tests, those are going to run in Node. So when you're learning like Node for your backend stuff, also keep in mind that it's really great to know Node, the basics of it for, build tools and all this other shit. And like for myself, it's very, very I spend a lot of time dealing with this kind of shit. Broken build scripts, fucked up CI/CD pipelines, writing tests, test infrastructure. Those are like kind of big dog type things, I think. And depending on your front end team, but those are things that you will end up, as you progress. When you first start out, you might not dabble in that shit, but as you progress, you'll need to know. And this sort of covers like Webpack, Rollup, Parcel, all those like code bundlers, Babel, which is your transpiler, or like whatever you're using, testing and all that stuff. I kind of throw it all into this like Node category. At that point, like once and that stuff might come later because that's very, very fucking hard. It requires like understanding how Webpack really works, or like configuring Webpack and stuff can be very daunting when you first start out. But at that point, so I would say you don't even need to know that for your first job, but like the basics of Node is what you really want to do, what you want to think about. Like build a CLI in Node, something like that. It doesn't have to be too complicated. But once you like have a handle, once you can now like also build a web server and connect it to a database and do that shit, and you can deploy, and you could like, and your front end skills are pretty decent, you could really the world is like at your fucking fingertips at that point. You could build almost anything. You could build so much cool shit. The limiting factor will be like time and stuff, but you can, at this point, you should be exploring your own projects to make. And at that point, you're probably like 4 or 5 months in. I would think 3 to 5 months, something like that. Or maybe longer. Like totally okay if this takes you longer to get to. But at this point, once you learn the back end stuff and the front end stuff, now you want to just build projects. The ideal would be to build like one dope ass big cool project, especially something that could get like that actually gets web traffic and users. Ooh, baby, I would hire that person in an instant if they like taught themselves how to code, built a website that actually gets users. That's really impressive. That'll get you a job. But that's hard. That's no joke. I don't think anything I've built has ever had any traffic. Something did for a little bit. Oh, you know what? I did build a GraphQL API that used to get a couple hits every now and then. We used to get like 10 to 20 hits a day, something like that. That was probably the closest thing. But overall, at this point, just build projects. You can explore other concepts like testing, but testing is such an interesting one. People have crazy fucking philosophy on testing. There's people who are like testing is everything. There's people who are like don't test at all. But you don't really knowing basic testing is great for your first job, but you're not even gonna know why you're right. Like what if you've only been writing code for 2 or 3 months, you might not even understand like the point of tests. I don't think I understand the point of tests for years, for like at least a year. Yeah. But anyway, I would say also at this point, after you've built a couple projects, you can explore other technology. Like, go nuts. Explore the stuff that you want to explore. Explore GraphQL, TypeScript, or like whatever you want to do. If you want to poke at another language, that's fine. I would say you should only focus on JavaScript for your first like year or two. It's just too much to like learn another language. There's too much in JavaScript that you can't learn it. Like if you pile another language on, you'll never actually reach the mastery in JavaScript that you need. I would also recommend at this point, I did just kind of say this, but one thing that helped me a lot was learning TypeScript like about a year in. I already had my first job and I started learning TypeScript, and TypeScript it's JavaScript with like, it's a superset of JavaScript, which is fucking nerdy as shit, but it's basically JavaScript with a type system slapped on top. And what this does is like, it lets you in code tell the compiler or tell, whatever, what type everything is. So you can say like, this variable is a string. This variable is an object with a property called blah, which is a string. By doing that, you're creating this system of like static code analysis. So now by defining your types, your code can tell you like your editor, your man, I'm tired. Your IDE or just a TypeScript compiler can tell you so many things about your code that you didn't even know. And you'll learn so much about data types from TypeScript. You'll learn so much about code. Like there are so many obvious things to me that I didn't realize starting out that TypeScript just helped me a lot with. It's also very commonly used, and it's a great language. It's fucking awesome. I prefer it to JavaScript. There's other benefits to learning it, but really I think the big one is that you'll learn so much about code and data types from learning TypeScript. It's really fucking cool. So I would definitely throw that on the list of things. But this is already like long as shit. And just HTML, CSS, like step 1, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, that's a lot. That's months. And that's just to get you off the ground. That's not even like, it's not like you're going to be an expert. By the time, if you're 6 months in, you will be an expert at nothing. Like there's just no fucking way. You might be able to, I was pretty good at React 6 months in. You could probably get something like that. But like, there's elements like JavaScript you're not going to know. And then there's also like, over time you develop an intuition for a lot of things. You'll make like reference points in your head as you gain more experience. So you'll see like a problem that you've never seen before might take you hours to figure out the first time it happens. But then when you'll see it again and you'll know immediately what the issue is. And that'll happen over and over and over again. So now it's really common for me to like, I almost code by intuition. Like I especially for bugs, like bugs in particular, it's pretty common to like look at something happening and have a really, really good idea before I even like dig into the code of like why something is happening. Or at least I can like develop theories and a place to start. I don't think there's anything now where I'd be like, I don't even know where to start. I say that, but like, yeah, that's fatal last words. I'll probably get hit with something today. And I'm not saying like everything's really easy, because for sure it's not, but I generally know where to like tug on string and stuff. And I think that comes in time. I think like so much of this stuff is like, this is why I don't think you can just be a great coder or like a great developer in like 6 months. You need to be able to see what software looks like built over the long term. Like if you're just building something and then you deploy it or whatever and you just call it done and that's it, you never come back to it, that's not really like what actual software development is like. Like when you're at a company or you're working for something, you're building on top of stuff that exists all the time, and it's very rare for a project just to get made, complete, and then never get touched again. That is very, very rare. Generally speaking, things are being like modified or changed, or users are requesting something, or any number of things that happen, and it's just like constant development on the stuff. And I don't think you can't get the experience of that unless you've actually had, seen that. And that just takes time. Like you just have to work somewhere for a while and see like the evolution of a single app over like a year or whatever. That's why I'm always very hesitant when I see like YouTube videos of like 12-year-old coding prodigy, shit like that. You might be you can probably get really good at writing code, but building good software and writing good code are two very different things. That's so important to keep in mind. Good software and good code are like, they don't necessarily need to, you could have, great code with terrible software, and you could have great software with terrible fucking code. And that's really, I think that's really common. And I think at the end of it, like, I used to be really fascinated with the idea of writing good code and like, writing things very neatly, and at a certain point you realize that you're just kind of spinning your wheels. Like the point of writing code is for the end, for the product you're making. As soon as you're writing code that's just looking pretty or like serving itself, like writing good code is not an end in itself. I'll put it that way. If you're writing good code just to write good code, then you're like wasting your time. You want to get things out the door pretty fucking quickly, and not, you don't have to like fucking, every line doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. You got to let go of the idea of like writing perfect code at a certain point. Just get the thing done, because there's a million other things that you need to do that are so much more important, or at least like can deliver more value than just writing neat code. It is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but you just have to know why. You write good code so that, obviously so that like the behavior you're looking for, is good. You write good code so that the thing you're trying to make is good, but also you're writing, the other reason you write clean code is so that the next person who comes in and works on it can like build on top of things quicker and easier, because they actually know what's going on, because your code isn't a fucking big bowl of spaghetti. But I tell you what, I've almost exclusively worked with big bowls of spaghetti, and you just get used to it, and it's not that big of a deal. Point is, get shit done and get it out the door. Do it right. Like don't just fucking half-ass it, but don't like agonize over every single line of code. Anyway, we've been going on for an hour here. Some good thoughts here. I think I'm going to sit down and probably try and put together like a visual thing, put on the website for what I'm talking about here with some resources and shit. Other than that, I'm going to go get started on my day, and I will